Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, I'm going to try to repair this Amiga 4000. Let's get right to it. This Amiga 4000 was donated to the channel by George. If you remember my pet rescue series, the Pet 2001, that machine was also donated by the same George who lived out near Bend, Oregon. Thank you very much, George, for donating this. Well, unfortunately, this 4000 does not work. Or at least it didn't when I first tested it when I got it from George. So it's now time to work on this. Now, as a disclaimer, I have opened this machine up. It had a video toaster inside, which I've removed. I've removed all of the cards, actually. And I did also remove the hard drives, and I have some screws and stuff here. So I know there's nothing loose inside this machine. There is nothing that looks dangerous to power it up on. This is an Amiga 4000 040, which means instead of having a 68030 CPU card in it, it has the 040 card. From my understanding, you could buy this computer with either CPU configuration, and the CPU is not built into the motherboard. So if you have an 041 like this, which says /040 here on the sticker, that means that if I pull that card out, there is no CPU at all, and the computer clearly won't work. Like I had just mentioned, this computer is in really good shape, except it's just dirty, but that's nothing that a little elbow grease won't fix. So the Amiga 4000, along with the Amiga 600 and 1200, are notorious for leaking caps, kind of like the Macintoshes that I just did on the Repairathon. So there's a good chance that that is probably one of the faults in this machine. Now, I did briefly power this on when I first got it, and I wrote on the top with a big piece of tape that it was flashing a yellow screen. So let's power on the monitor here, and let's see if this has still the same symptoms. I would say it's been, like over a year since I've had this machine, so maybe it's gotten worse. I don't know. We'll find out in a second. Make sure the monitor is on RGB, which it is. It's plugged in through the Amiga video cable on the back, and here we go. Let's power this on. Okay, we're getting the green screen immediately, and it's flashing. So it's good in that there's a video signal, bad in that it's flashing. I noticed there's no power LED at all, so that's a bit strange. Oh, sorry for the background noise, my AC just turned on. Let's turn on the computer again. Same exact problem, it's flashing with a green screen. So I assume it's some type of an error, like maybe it's a RAM error or something else, and then the computer is resetting itself. Let me pop off the cover. Now, I never reinstalled the screws because I knew I would be working on this computer again. So that's easy to remove. So there's the inside of the machine. And like I had mentioned, I already removed the cards that were in here. Now, one thing you may notice right off the bat, and people might be like, oh dear, this machine has a battery still. Now, when I opened this when I first got it, I inspected it and I didn't witness any leaking from the battery. And I am quite sure that George, the previous owner of this machine, had this replaced at some point. So I'll definitely be taking this out and replacing this with a new battery and not another rechargeable one like this. I'll put in a CR2032 with a diode. But this board, of course, has lots of these surface mount electrolytic caps all around and on the CPU card, which is down behind this riser card. And none of them actually look leaky. Well, they probably are leaking, but I don't see a lot of corrosion. This is nothing like those Macs I was just working on where there was substantial damage on the boards from the leaking caps. I can see there's definitely a little bit of corrosion evidence right here around the battery, but generally it doesn't look too bad. Now, I did a quick Google for flashing green screen, and here we are on the English Amiga board, and it definitely seems like people are saying that the problem is bad chip memory, as that would cause the green flashing. And taking a look at the RAM here, there are actually 5 slots, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's this slot back here that contains the chip memory. And supposedly the green flashing means a chip memory problem. Now, one thing that scares me to death about these SIM sockets is I know they are notoriously easy to break. These little plastic clips that are on both sides of each of the SIMs are very easy to snap. And once you break those, there is really nothing to hold this memory in. And of course, you can't get a working computer without working RAM. So if these break off, there's a good chance I'm going to have to replace these SIM sockets altogether. And I really, really don't want to do that. So I think as a first step, I'm just going to remove this motherboard from this case so I can work on it a little more easily out of the case. One thing I don't like about the Amiga 4000, it's relatively serviceable, but the problem is you can't take all the screws of the motherboard out without taking this drive chassis out that's holding the floppy. And to get that off, you have to take the front cover off. And to get the front cover off, it's kind of hard. There are little clips all around the front here, which require you to carefully bend them and squeeze them to try to get this stupid front panel off. It's all just not very easy, at least from my understanding. If there's a trick that you know, please let me know in the comments section, so the next time I work on this 4000, I won't have such a hard time. Well, that explains why the power LED wasn't working. None of these front switches were actually plugged in. You route them through a small hole in the front of the case right here. And yeah, I guess this machine has been serviced before to change that battery last time, and those were never reconnected. So that's why I saw no power LED. Okay, so here's the 4000 motherboard, and here is the 68040 accelerator board. Now, like I had mentioned, this looked like there wasn't too much corrosion around this Varda battery. I mean, it's a Varda, so you know what that means, really, right? Let's flip this over and see what we see. Uh-oh. Well, that does not look good. That is definitely battery leakage. Now, I can say that this battery does appear that it was changed. I see evidence of rework on the battery pins there, but I definitely see a good amount of corrosion on here. It's not to say this computer is ruined from this, but this is not good. I'm gonna have to clean this off, or I'll use some vinegar to start with on this battery, because it's very basic. What leaks out of these NiCad batteries is a base, and you need a vinegar to neutralize it. So I'm gonna pour a ton of vinegar on this thing, and we'll let it soak and see if we can at least get rid of some of this fluff and corrosion. Good, the air conditioning finally shut off. Okay, so in this little container here which says biohazard, I happen to have some regular white vinegar. So I'm just gonna put a towel under it and we'll pour some on and just let this work at it. This looks like someone has attempted to clean this already. So I'm not seeing a lot of reaction. When you have a lot of the base from the leaky battery, you'll get fizzing, you know, which is what you get with a vinegar and a base. There's definitely some corrosion in here. I see some traces that do not look great. So some bodge wires are probably in this motherboard's future. So I'm just gonna spread this around and then I'm gonna let it sit. Now the vinegar is just pooled up on here. I'm gonna take my tweezers and I'm just gonna scrape the solder mask a little bit, because there are probably areas right here where the corrosion has made its way underneath the solder mask. So it's corroded anyway, so I might as well just release it and allow the vinegar to, you know, make contact with the copper. And then what I'll do is I'll reapply some kind of a coating on here. I just don't want the leaky NiCad electrolyte to be lingering around underneath the solder mask to kind of continue to corrode away. All right, well, I'm going to cut away the source of the problem, which is this bad battery, right? I use my little snips here, these side cutters, and I just cut away at the battery to get it out of here. There's this battery, made in Germany. I would say that this one doesn't look leaky because I don't see any evidence of leaking on these metal pads here. So this battery probably didn't cause this leakage. This was probably leakage from the previous battery, and whoever cleaned it up probably replaced it and just didn't get all the corrosion. So I'm going to pour some of my vinegar on this side of the board. See little spots where the traces look bad right here. Oh, but once you remove the solder mask, it looked okay. So So really this is my first time trying to do any repair work on an Amiga 4000. And while we let this vinegar soak in, I'm checking around the capacitors here and it doesn't look that bad. I don't see a lot of evidence of the leaky caps. Ooh, I think these are a little crusty over here. So we got a little bit of leakage in this area of the board. Yep. It could be just dirty. I need to clean this board. It's all pretty dusty, but yeah, I'd say what's on this IC and everything around here is corroded. All right, I want to try to take this RAM out of here. And the RAM is pretty much this double stacked stuff. And it looks like it's barely in the sockets. So these little clips here and here, you have to bend them to the sides to get the memory out. And these are what break. So you have to just be so careful and only bend it as much. Boy, I thought that broke. It didn't. And maybe there's some corrosion on the pads, which is why they're not working or why we're getting that flashing. But I'm going to try to take all this out so I can give this motherboard a good wash. Okay, so far 2 out without breaking. Okay, there we go. That one's out. Keep your fingers crossed, everyone. There we go. Next one out. Nope, we're looking good. These aren't snapped. You just have to be so careful. And this last one is the chip memory, which is what's causing that green flashing. Supposedly, it could also be a bad trace, could be a bad capacitor, could be lots of things, right? Carefully. There we go. And there is the 2 megabyte chip memory. From my understanding, that's how big this is. Okay, I'm going to remove these 2 Kickstart ROMs. It says Kickstart version 40.68, Amiga 4000. Just because these labels are ready to fall off, I am going to write 176 here and 175 there. That's the silk screened part number right there for the motherboard. So I will know exactly how to put these back in when I go to reassemble. Oh, these chips are really stuck. So there are the 2 chips out. Wow, that was crazy to get these out. They aren't broken or anything. Well, I want to wash the board at this point. Some people do recommend taking out any of the socketed ICs. So that there's this large one here. This is chipped as well. Everything else is soldered on. But you know what? I'm going to wash this as is. And I'm going to do it in the sink with soap and water. And we're going to put this thing into the water. So the motherboard is soaking in the soapy water. I think I want to try to test this RAM out. This is all the memory I took out. I have a motherboard to test this on, and it's not an Amiga 4000. It is a Pentium test bench I have. I took this out of some random computer ages ago. I think the case was wrecked or whatever. There's a power supply under there. There's the old motherboard mounting plate. I have a compact flash, or I'm sorry, rather an SD card to IDE adapter here. And it does have a 3D printed backplate, so I can just let this sort of sit on top of here. So I'd say that this RAM should at least work in here. Maybe not that chip memory stick, but at least these individual ones. Unlike the Amiga, the memory slots on this have metal clips on them, so that you have no issue with a risk of breaking it by taking the memory in and out. All right, 1 Amiga RAM sim is in this machine. I also have a postcard connected. The postcard, if you're familiar, has an ISA or PCI slot, and it will show the BIOS postcode. Very helpful in diagnosing a PC. If you don't get initialization on the RAM or on the VGA, so you have no image, but you're trying to figure out what the error is, you can use a postcard. It also has a little thing to plug a speaker in. Since this motherboard has no speaker, there is one on this card here, so I can hear any kind of beep codes. And let me to the power and see what happens. Okay, so we're getting a beep code, and I think this is upside down right now, so we are getting a 13. So let me try installing a second memory module here. So I'm going to install a second memory module. I really don't remember if you need 2 on the 440BX motherboard or not. And it looks like you need 2, because now it's booting up normally the codes and we have picture. So we got 8 megs of RAM. That's with 2 of these. So the Amiga had 16 megs of RAM in it, not including the chip memory. So I'm just going to install the other 2 memory modules, and then I'll run memtest 86, and we'll just validate that at least the fast RAM on the Amiga is all good and has no errors. So that's interesting. When I power it up with all the memory in, I get a white screen. Well, that was definitely a bust with the original RAM I had in this machine, which is stuff I just found in a box. Computer works fine. And yet with this Amiga memory, not so much. Okay, so that was a fail. I cannot test the Amiga memory on a Pentium motherboard. Okay, it's time to take the motherboard out of the soapy water. I'd say it's been soaking for long enough. I need to drain the sink and then give this motherboard a good rinse to get all of the detergent and soap off of it. Motherboard's looking very nice and clean, but clearly it's all wet. And I want to give it a nice dry before I do any work. Like, I'm not going to try to power it up like this, obviously. So I'm going to hit the motherboard with the duster. This was sent in on a mail call by a very nice viewer. I absolutely love this thing. It's like a vacuum cleaner motor with a vacuum cleaner nozzle, and it's ESD safe, and it's great for blowing all of the water out of all the nooks and crannies of motherboards like this. It really accelerates the drying, and I don't need to use alcohol, so I'm not breathing in those toxic fumes. This thing is just air. So looking at the top side, it's better in this area post-cleaning. So this is obviously the real-time clock chip here. It's labeled Rico. I don't know what this little IC does here, but definitely a lot of corrosion around its legs. But hopefully it's still connected and still working. I'm going to try to trace out some of these traces here. These seem to head up to this resistor pack right there and make sure it's good. And of course, we'll be changing all these capacitors. And the back of the board is looking way better. Now you'll see some scratch marks here. That's from my tweezers where I was trying to scratch the solder mask off of these traces. But all that NiCad juice had leaked on the back here and it was kind of dull. So most of this is all nice and shiny again in all the other areas. But I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. I think this is good. This shouldn't get any worse as time goes on. So before I remove any of these caps, I'm going to use my phone to take pictures close up of the board, of the orientation of the caps. And that way I can quickly reference it without having to check on some data sheet to see exactly where the new caps are going to go back on. Okay, all the caps are off, the pads are cleaned. I even cleaned up the battery connector here. I was able to get the solder out, but you can see here, these capacitors here and here, things are looking good. And over here by the audio jacks, all of this cleaned up really well. There are, what, 6 capacitors there. None of the pads are screwed up or damaged. There's a cap here that came off very nicely. Over by the power connector here, there's a cap there and 2 there, and those pads look great. There's a cap right here, and that one is good. And one thing that's really funny is I think this is a mistake. See this little thing that's stuck on the board here? This looks like a pin socket. Underneath this crystal here are these pin sockets. So see, I can take this crystal off the motherboard, and it doesn't look like there's a socket there, but there are little tiny metal pin sockets. So basically the hole is slightly bigger on the motherboard, and then things like this can plug straight in. Well, it looks like to me they accidentally dropped one of those pin sockets on the motherboard right there, and it got sort of stuck down with the soldering. So I'm going to remove that because there's no way that that's supposed to be sitting right there. And this capacitor here, these are the pads that are the most sort of gunked up. But it's actually not a big deal because it didn't really get too deep, so I can just scrape the top layer off. This is a pick right here, and that will be perfect for soldering on the new capacitors. I'm going to give the RAM sockets a good scrub. This is 99% alcohol here, and I am just going to really give this a good old scrub with this toothbrush right in there. Hopefully if there was any kind of corrosion or issues inside there causing that RAM not to work, that should help. And I'm going to look anywhere else on the board where there might be a little bit of sort of blue looking corrosion on any pins on ICs, and I'm going to scrub that off with the IPA and the toothbrush. This is the mess of all the capacitors, the pins, the base, and even the solder wick that I used to clean up this board. I did also take the capacitors off of the accelerator, and that is all of the crap that this board had on it. Good riddance to you. This is all going into the trash. Bye-bye. Okay, it's been a few days and I'm sure that these things are totally dry, so I'll do the recapping and then I can test them out. For the recapping, I bought some recap kits from Console5. I'll put a link in the description to these. I've never used them from these guys before, so I don't know how good they are. But taking a look at the capacitors they sent me, they seem to be Panasonic brand, which I'm going to say is a thumbs up. They're pretty good. It does come with 2 of the electrolytics, which I've actually already changed. These are the 2 that were on the motherboard already. So one is here and one is here. And just for fun, let's take a look at what these are on the ESR meter. So they're 16 volts, 470 microfarad. So let's just pop them into the ESR meter. So 413 microfarad at 0.19 ohms, and actually that's at 1 kilohertz. Let's change the frequency. These are probably used on like the 12 volt or 5 volt rail, which means the frequency should probably be set to 100 hertz. So we'll test that again. 440 and 0.2 ohms. So I'd say that that capacitor is actually totally good. And this other one, 443 microfarads at 0.2 ohms as well. So both of these are definitely good, but hey, I had these capacitors here, so I might as well change them, right? Okay, so I have the photographs that I took of the boards here, and I'm going to start with the processor board. I've called this accelerator board a couple times in this video. I apologize. Since there is no processor on the motherboard, this is actually just a CPU card and not an accelerator. But if there were one on the motherboard, this would be an accelerator, right? So all the pads are nice and they're ready to accept the capacitors. Let me begin the soldering. Okay, other than the iPad problems, the recapping was uneventful. Everything went on quite easily. No issues with pads not taking the solder. Of course, I used lots of flux from my flux pen on both the pads and on the bottoms of the capacitors, so it was all pretty simple. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tone out those traces on the bottom and a couple on the top here that don't look good, and add any bodges that I need. Okay, so I've toned out pretty much everything I can here, and right now it seems to be all good. When I'm done, I will coat it with this clear lacquer, but I won't do that yet until I troubleshoot this board and make sure it works. Because if there is a fault that I missed over in this area and I put lacquer on there, it will be harder for me to fix. So I'm just gonna leave it as is and do some testing of this board like it is here. Okay, I carefully inserted the 2 megabytes of chip RAM and the 2 ROMs, and I used the Deoxit, of course, on those. So especially with the ROMs, they were so hard to get out, so the Deoxit makes it easier to take those out if I need to. I also applied Deoxit inside the processor card connector, which I'm going to carefully reconnect right now. There are little black plastic standoffs that you basically screw into to hold the processor card in. There's one on both sides of there. There was one more that I took out, but there originally were 4 and only 2 of them are left. So I will screw those back in, but that's after we do the testing. Okay, so I'm ready to go for testing. 1084 is connected and powered on. Power supply is connected to the motherboard. There is power into it. Processor card is installed. 2 megabytes of chip RAM is on the board. The original chip RAM that was showing is bad. So if I have the exact same problem, I think the next thing we'll do is to change out the chip RAM. And then I think I'm good. I don't think I need fast RAM on the Amiga 4000. I think chip RAM should be enough to at least get it to show the startup screen. Oh yeah, and the ROMs are installed underneath there. So I'm crossing my fingers that nothing's going to smoke on this. We're going to watch this together. Here we go. Oh no, it's still green. Okay, well, that is at least the same as it was. So it's not worse. I think that means that the processor is running and the ROMs are running because that's the green screen. So I think the next thing to try will be to switch out the chip RAM. I think what I have not done is test to see if the voltage rails are correct. So let's just give this a quick check on the power supply. 11.95, that would be the 12 volt rail clearly. That is working fine. And the 5 volt rail is the important one. 5.009. Okay, so we're looking good on the 2 voltage rails. Okay, let me very carefully pop out this chip memory. There it is. So I know this memory totally works, and it is 60 nanoseconds, which appears to be a little faster. This is 70. And let me carefully do the insertion. I feel very uneasy putting memory in and out of these SIM sockets, but what can I do, right? Okay, the memory is in, and let's see what happens. I'm going to leave it set for 2 megabytes, and we'll turn this on. Oh, wait, look at that. Gray screen. Come on, please. It's probably looking for the hard drive. Maybe. Let's see what happens. It's very possible that this memory is just not compatible, and without working chip memory, you're not going to get a display of any kind. So this doesn't seem quite right. It shouldn't take... Oh, whoa! Oh my, look at that! It's working! Oh boy! Alright, the original floppy drive from this machine is connected, which may not work, but I have Amiga Workbench 3.0 here. We'll try booting this. Even though the ROMs are Workbench 3.1, the 3.0 floppy should work. Oh, I need to plug a mouse in. Alright, I have a tank mouse plugged in, and let's power on the power supply again. I guess I have the floppy cable on backwards. Let's power this on. Well, the floppy drive is accessing, so that's a good sign. All right. Oh, look at this, everyone. So we're only seeing 2 megabytes of memory. So I assume to go to 8 megabytes, maybe there's a mod you have to do, or this is not the right memory, but it is working at 2 megabytes, even though it's an 8 megabyte stick, which is fine with me. The computer, on the other hand, so far seems to be working fine. I mean, we're just in Workbench here, not stress testing it, but this is a good sign that it's actually working. So I didn't really want to break up the 4 SIMs that were in the Pentium by putting 1 for chip RAM. So I actually tried this random SIM I had that had 4 chips on it in that socket. And sure enough, it works. We're getting the same 2 megabytes of chip RAM. And that's perfect because this was a one-off chip. I don't even know where it came from. And the fact is it's working, so all the better. Now, as for the rest of the RAM, I have this memory here, which I found in a box. I'm going to try this stuff in this machine and see if it works. I don't actually know the size of this, but it's less tall than that tall memory that was in here. And I didn't like how it was barely fitting into these sockets. So hopefully this memory fits in here a little bit better and it actually works in here. Now the question is, can you install 1 memory module into the Amiga 4000? Oh, this is the fast memory. I don't know, so I'm going to install 2 of these just because that's sort of like what you have to do in the PC. And the memory does go in there okay. This is 60 nanosecond RAM incidentally, so that should be fast enough. I am just being very careful with these stupid ass clips here. There's 1. Come on, there we go. While we wait for this to boot, there is a jumper right here which says SIM size, and it basically says 256 times 32 or 1 megabytes times 32. So one of those is obviously larger. It's currently set to the larger of the 2 settings. So I assume this machine had a maxed out memory configuration originally. So let's see if this works at all. And yes, everything seems to be working. We have 2 megs of graphics memory or chip memory and 8 megabytes of other memory, which is fast memory. So I should be able to get this thing up to 16 megabytes if I install those other 2 SIMs in here. Okay, all the memory is installed. Nothing broke on the clips, but these clips on the right, they've been sort of bent over to one side for so long with that other memory that was installed in here that even when I push them into the right position, they sort of spring back over to the side. So hopefully this all holds together. I just heard a little snap sound from this RAM area here, so I'm going to take a closer look, make sure nothing broke. Everything looks okay. The computer's booting right now. So let's see what we got. Yep, 16 megabytes of RAM, 16 megs, 2 megs of chip RAM. So thumbs up to a fully maxed out memory configuration on the Amiga 4000. So I wanted to show you guys close up what's happening with these little clips. So I'm lifting up on the clip and moving it over, and it just kind of moves back off the SIM. So it's barely holding the SIM. So I'm going to take a little bit of folded up paper and I'm going to try to like wedge it in between the clip and the side of the SIM socket. The plastic on the SIM socket is stronger right here, so this just helps keep that clip pushed this way onto the memory module. All right, so I've been playing around with this machine a little bit, and not all is well with it. Yeah, it's kind of working. Oh, maybe it's actually going to work right now. Sometimes when I power on the machine, let me power cycle it, I get a yellow screen. And it's not yellow right now, so it's seemingly working. If I power cycle it enough times, I'll get a flashing yellow screen, which is incidentally, that's what I saw when I first tested this machine. I written on it, yellow flashing screen. And then when we went to test this later, we had the flashing green, and it seemed like it was definitely the bad chip memory, which changing this out made it work. But now I occasionally get a flashing yellow screen. But it's intermittent, and the machine appears to work when you don't get that power on flashing screen. It actually boots up normally. So I'm booting sysinfo here, which will show us a little bit of information about this machine. And I noticed there's a problem in this program too, that maybe something's bad. Let's look at that. Well, I hit the speed button to check that, and the computer has actually locked up. So this machine is definitely an unhappy machine. But here's what I wanted to mention. It says clock not found. That's got to be an issue. Now, I don't have a battery connected to the machine right now, but that's fine because even when the battery is disconnected and you power up the Amiga, you should have a clock because the clock chip, oh, the computer just rebooted itself. The clock chip is right here, and 5 volts is being supplied to the rechargeable battery, which of course is not installed, but the computer should see a clock. So there's some kind of damage here that has caused the clock not to be working, and I guess it's maybe causing this instability. Although this could still easily be this fast RAM Maybe this RAM I installed is not completely compatible with this computer. It's totally possible. So I think at the minimum, it's time to investigate what's going on with the clock here and see if I can get this working. Incidentally, you notice I'm using an external floppy drive that has a Gotek in it, and there's a nice jumper right here on the Amiga 4000 that lets you select between the internal floppy drive or the external drive to be DF0, which is the first floppy drive on the Amiga. Okay, so I'm trying to troubleshoot the clock issue. So you're booting up a Workbench disk here. If you try to even read the clock or even reset the clock, it just says clock not found. I also ran Amiga SysTest or Amiga Test Kit, I think it's called. It's an open source diagnostic suite. It also reports it can't find the clock. This IC here is the clock chip, and it's getting power. I've checked all the traces, everything looks good, but it connects to the address bus of the computer through this IC right here, which is right next to the battery and all that corrosion. Now I'm looking at the address lines that go into this chip. It's a 74LS174, and I see, when I try to read the clock, I see bursts of activity on the CPU side, on the computer side of things. But the pins that go to this chip, they just sit there at high. Here's the 74HCT174. That's the chip that connects U178. So this is the clock chip over here on the right, and it's connected to the computer's bus. And I see activity on the left side of this chip, but I see absolutely nothing on the right side. There's a clock input to the 174. That's called latch address, and that clock signal looks totally good as well. Now, I think there's really two possibilities. Either this clock chip itself is bad, U178, or this HCT174 is bad. Now, I'm not totally sure how this circuit is supposed to work. The clock chip has 4 data lines and 4 address lines. The 4 data lines are connected directly to the same data bus connections as the ROM chips, which are clearly working because the computer is booting up properly. So those signals are getting through, and I can look in the scope and I can see those data signals. But on the other hand, the address lines aren't getting any signals at all. They are just stuck high. This really feels like, to me, like this 174 here is bad. This 174 IC is quite crusty. So I think my best bet is probably just to remove this from the motherboard, see if I can find another surface mount chip to try to install. Well, I'm going to end this video here. I know everyone just loves it when the videos are super long, but I have to cut them down to some amount of length, and there will be another part, at least. So if you like this video so far, I'd appreciate a thumbs up, but if you didn't, you know what to do. You can hit that thumbs down button, hit that subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. It really helps. And of course, hit that little bell icon if you want to get notified when I post new videos. And then you put your comments and your suggestions down in the comment section below. I really appreciate it when you do comment. And that's going to be it. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.